All right. So from everything we learned so far, I'm just going to go ahead and randomly pick one person to answer the first question. I'm going to read it first. Okay. So if you just to see to test your knowledge so far. So the first question, Scrum. Can you see my screen? Okay, or is it too small? Is it okay?
I think we can see it.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay.
It's okay.
It's a little bit small.
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, let me try to see if I can zoom, scroll, and all right. So the first question, Scrum is founded on empirical process, control theory, and or empiricism. Three pillars uphold every implementation of empirical process control. What are they? A, trust, faith, hope. B, transparency, inspection, adaptation. C, discussion, reflection, and development. All right, let me go ahead and pick, let's see, Hélène. What do you think is the answer?
C.
Yes. A, B, or C?
C.
C, so discussion, reflection, and development.
Yes.
You sure?
I think so, yes.
All right, let's see. We just saw it. It's B. Transparency, inspection, and adaptation. I'm going to show you where we spoke about it when I was explaining what the empiricism is. You have those three principles of empiricism: transparency, inspection, and adaptation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Can I change my answer? B.
All right. I'm gonna go to the next question, and if you can make that up, I'll let you answer. So what are the 5 Scrum values? A, hard work, courage, focus, working long hours, and respect. B, honoring the product owner, honoring the Scrum Master, focus, openness, and respect. C, commitment, courage, focus, openness, and respect.
C.
Okay, are you sure?
100% sure.
All right.
Yep.
Good job. All right. The next one, which one is of these statements is true? A, the Scrum should only be used to build simple products. B, the Scrum is a framework that can be used to build complex products. C, Scrum should only be used to build software products. Let's see, which one is the right answer? Serge Trufa?
Yes, the right answer is B.
B, Scrum is a framework that can be used to build complex products. Let's see. All right, the right answer is B, and we saw it when we spoke about Agile, and Scrum is one of the Agile's methodologies, right? This is where we spoke about it, complex products. So that's where Agile performed the best, okay? All right, that's it for the quizzes for now. Let's move on to the lecture, and we should start here. Okay, so now we're going to discuss a little bit about the Scrum framework, what's inside. And so far, I gave you a brief overview of what goes into the Scrum methodology and why we're trying to use it, right? Now we're going to deep a little, deeper into what is inside the framework. And as a Scrum Master, you need to make sure you understand every single items that I'm going to present to you. And for the sake of the test, those are the things that are going to be, the test is going to be revolving around. So the Scrum framework is made of 3 big group of items. The first one is the core roles, the Scrum core roles. And I think it was Jorgen who asked the question about the team openness and stuff like that. And I was saying that when we're going to talk about the core roles, I'm going to explain that a little further. And under the roles, you have the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team or the dev team. That's what makes a Scrum team. So anytime you're going to be seeing a question about Scrum team on the test, you need to think about the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the dev team group. Okay. Next, you do have some events, right? That some other people, are usually misled to think that it is the same thing as ceremonies or meetings. Let me just ask real quick, what is the difference between an event and a meeting or a ceremony? Who knows the difference? Okay, I think Patricia, you're gonna help me on that one. What's the difference between, are you there? Patricia? All right. Let's move on to somebody else. Lise. Lise, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
I don't really, I can't really explain what's the difference between events, and for me, I think like the events are much more like the ceremonies as well.
Okay. Can anybody help? What's the difference between, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Abdallah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, my son put his name there.
Oh,
It's Aisha. Yeah. So I think events are what's happening with, oh my God, how do I put this?
Go ahead, it's fine.
From the beginning of the sprint
Yeah.
till the end. And while ceremonies are something like the daily stand-up, which is a ceremony that take place like every day. It has a framework of 15 minutes, I think. Well, that's all I can say.
Okay. So that's really the closest answer that we can get. Obviously, there was really no other concrete answer, but that's the closest answer we can get. And I think you got it right somehow. But just to add up on what you said, the difference between an event, and that's really, really important for those who are going to be taking the certification, or those who are working and coaching their Scrum teams in their companies. You need to make sure you understand the difference, because people are usually using those terminologies interchangeably, and it's not the same. A ceremony is the same thing as a meeting, but it's not exactly the same thing as an event. An event is something that is at the heart of the sprint or the Scrum sprint. Under it itself, you have a sprint under an event. So the event is something that is time boxed. The sprint is 2 weeks. That's time boxed. And it's not necessarily a meeting. Okay, so a sprint is a time boxed event, but it's not a meeting. So it is a time box period of time where you're trying to accomplish something. That's an event. The sprint is usually 2 weeks, is time boxed, is not a meeting, is an event. The sprint planning is a meeting and is a ceremony as well, and it's also an event because it's time boxed. Same thing for the sprint review, the spring retrospective, and the daily Scrum meeting. Those are meetings. So the last 4 that I mentioned, sprint planning, spring review, spring retrospective, daily Scrum meeting, those are ceremonies or those are meetings. But the sprint is not a ceremony. The only one on that list that is an event, but it's not a ceremony, is the sprint. But it's a time box, time frame under which you're trying to accomplish something. In our case, a sprint is a 2 weeks or 2 to 4 weeks time boxed time frame under which you're trying to create and produce an increment. Does that make sense? So if you get tricked into a question that is asking you if a sprint is a Scrum ceremonies, then say it's incorrect. A sprint is not a ceremony. It is an event. All the other 4 ones are ceremonies and meetings as well. Does that make sense? Okay, so and
Question.
then, yeah, go ahead, Serge.
Yeah, just to make sure I understand correctly, can we say then that an event is an umbrella term for a time box, happening, and then a sprint or a meeting or a ceremony is a type of event?
That's correct. That's why under this events box, you do have the 5 items. It's 5, including the sprint and the other ceremonies or meetings. So yes, your definition is correct. Okay. All
Thank
right.
you.
Any other question? So, and then under the framework, we mentioned the core roles, the events, and then you have the artifacts, which are the product backlogs, the sprint backlogs, and the product increment that we refer to as an increment as well. And one tricky question, we're going to get to it as well, right? Kind of a technicality, is some people confuse a product increment with an increment or sprint increment. And I'm going to explain to you. I already mentioned that before. You probably didn't realize it when I spoke about the waterfall model and the Scrum model, and I had the 2 close to give you a comparison. But there's a difference between the 2 of them. When we get to the product increment, I'm going to tell you specifically what's the difference. The product increment is bigger than an increment because it includes anything else that you did before. So it's the sum of all the increments that have been performed in the previous sprints, basically, plus a plan, etc. But we're going to come to get to it. All right, so moving on. Now let's look at the Scrum process. Okay, I mentioned to you the core roles, okay, the events and the artifacts. So now we're going to be seeing a little bit where all of them are fitting into in the Scrum process to get you the opportunity of visualizing the whole process and know potentially who is doing what or who is responsible for what at what level. Okay, so the first one is the dev team, which is at the center of the Scrum team. And yesterday I told you what a Scrum or Scrummage was, and I showed you the rugby team or 2 rugby teams trying to restart the play and being one close to the other and forming a Scrum or a Scrummage. So the team, the dev team, is at the center of any Scrum process. Okay, you have them here, and under or close to them, not under, because it's not a question of hierarchy. So next to them, to help them out, you have the Scrum Master. That's your job as a Scrum Master. You sit next to the dev team and you make sure that 1, they do understand the Scrum process, 2, that they work independently and they're self-organized, 3, that every impediment that they have or any blockage that they have to move forward with the product development is taken care of or is solved. Okay, and you also have the product owner who is sitting next to the Scrum Master and the dev team to kind of represent the customer. So he's basically the one who's representing the customer or any stakeholder that has a take into a product development or a feature that we're trying to develop. He's the one who's bringing the requirement. Okay.
Question.
Yes.
When you say he represent, it's not actually the customer. So internally, are we talking here about, let's say, a sales guy?
Good question. It can be anyone who's a customer. He can be the customer as well. So the product owner can be a customer, but he's the person who is delegated to join the Scrum team and share and clarify the requirements of what we're trying to develop or what we're trying to build with the dev team, right? It can be the marketing manager. It can be a CEO, he can be a product owner, you know, who works with the CEO or who works with the customer, or he can be the customer as well. Okay, so you can have different configuration. I'm even going to be going further, and I'm going to explain that also at some point when we talk about each roles. The product owner can also be part of the development team. The Scrum Master in some, you know, frameworks or environments can be also part of the development team. So someone can be Scrum Master and also develop code, is allowed into the Scrum. So if you get questions like that, asking you whether or not it's possible to have a Scrum Master who's part of the dev team, know that the answer is yes. You can have the product owner belonging also to the dev team. So he's both part of the dev team and also playing the role of the product owner. Okay, same thing for the Scrum Master. Any other question? Okay. So, and you see the product owner is actually the one that is writing the requirements. And in this case, we're gonna get to it. We talk about user stories. Under the Scrum methodology, we talk about user stories, which are basically use cases that describe in the simplistic
Sorry
way.
to interrupt.
Yes.
Isn't it any issue or conflict if the product owner is part of the dev team?
No, it's actually even good. You know why?
Because he's the one providing the requirements, this kind of thing or things, but he's inside the dev team as well.
Yeah. So it's actually even helpful because the closer he is from the product, the more value he's going to be able to convey. So decisions are going to be made much easily if he's part of the dev team, because he's going to be developing the product itself and he knows what is required. So there's nobody else who has a better knowledge of the product requirement than the product owner. So if he's or she is part of the development team, then it's going to be going really fast. They won't really spend too much time on their having refinement meetings where they get more information or they get more explanation, or they bring external SMEs to help them out because they have the product owner as part of their teams. So it's actually an advantage. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
All right. So I was saying that the product owner is responsible for the product backlog, which is a group of requirements that needs to be completed to build the product. So the requirements, the features, and all those things are broken down into small pieces of user stories or epics, and they are actually part of what we call the product backlog, and the product owner is responsible for that. We're going to get to it in a second. And then you have the sprint backlog. So in every sprint, which is an iteration, right? 2 weeks iteration, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, right? 1 week iteration, where we're getting some of the features or some of the requirements or some of the user stories, to be more precise, from the product backlog. And that's what we work on during the sprint. We complete it. And during the sprint, whatever we did select as part of the product backlog, we call it product backlog items. We do plan on how we want to develop it and how we want to release it. That's what we call the sprint backlog. So basically the sprint backlog is the product backlog items that are developed under a sprint, okay? And plus the plan to develop it as well. And then you get into the cycle of the 2 or 4 weeks. And during the 2 or 4 weeks, you have one ceremony that I mentioned before, the daily Scrum, which is happening every 24 hours daily, right? That's where all the teams are getting together to answer simple questions or provide information about what they're doing and what they're going to be doing and if they're facing any issues. Okay, so it happens every day during the sprint time, which is 2 weeks to 4 weeks, or sometimes even 1 week. Okay, and at the end of the 2 or 4 weeks, meaning at the end of the sprint, the product increment is completed and released to the product owner. And then there's a couple of other stuff happening, like the sprint review. We're going to talk about that. And there's a feedback from the product owner. And you can see here, sprint review, where you have the dev team, the Scrum Master, and the product owner, okay? Sitting together, the demonstration of what was built, the sector is happening during that meeting. We can also invite additional stakeholders, like I said before, that have any interest into the product. Like the CEO can come, the marketing manager, any people who has interest into it, or who can provide feedback to do the next sprint better and develop a better product increment. Okay, all right, let me go ahead and speed up to the next one now. Let's talk about the core roles, right? All right, so here you can see that, and again, for those who are familiar with Star Wars, you do have a couple of characters that we're using here to represent the different roles. Okay, you have the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the development team. This is a team of 4 developers only. Okay, so what is the role of the product owner? I briefly described it a few minutes ago. So I was saying that the product owner represents the customer, the stakeholders, and is the voice of the customer. That's basically what he is. And to your question, Jorgen, you do have situations where the product owner is one of those people, is either a CEO or marketing manager or anybody else who has interest into the product. Okay, and that's what the product owner is going to be really doing during all the sprints and during the whole project, no matter how many sprints there are. Okay, so the product owner is accountable for ensuring that the team delivers value to the business. And again, all the requirements that I publicized are born either from an issue to which we need to create a solution, or a need that we need to fulfill. In either ways, there's always a business justification behind any project, right? You can initiate a project to fix an issue, right? Or you can create a project to fulfill a need, because the market is maybe asking for a solution that doesn't exist yet, and there's a need that is there, and you want to fulfill it for business reason. Okay, so the product owner is going to be the one writing the customer-centric requirements, right? Because the product owner in general, unless he's part of the development team, as I said, it could happen. Unless he's part of the dev team, the product owner is usually somebody who's not technical. What he knows is he's business oriented, so he knows what the business needs, right? And he's giving you the requirements. What do you need to produce in order to fulfill that need, in order to fulfill those business requirements? Okay, so that's why he's at the center of writing the requirements most of the time. And when I'm using the terminology requirements, this actually sounds like the waterfall methodology. In Scrum, we do talk about epics or user stories. What's the difference? Anybody knows the difference between an epic and a user story?
Epic is more like the big story, and user story is more like granular.
Good job. That's exactly right. Okay. So usually it starts with, especially for projects that are having a lot of unknown information initially, there are high level requirements that are called in Scrum epics. And as we refine those, right, we do break those down into stories, user stories that describe the vision of the requirements from the business standpoint. And it's really simple. We also call them in some other methodologies use cases. So what do we need at the simplest level? What do we need to do to satisfy that requirement? That's basically what the user story is trying to convey, right? So let's say, and I'm going to show you what's the structure of a user story down the road as well. So I don't want to spend too much time on that. But you're gonna understand that if you don't right now. And the second thing, after writing the requirement, customer-centric requirements, the product owner is going to make sure that it's prioritized. Why? Well, we said that any project is created because it needs to have a business justification, add some business value up front, right? And if you have anything that needs to provide business values, let's say when we want to build a project or product that has many features, right? You need to make sure that you prioritize them in terms of risks, in terms of return. So we start developing what we think at the moment is the priority from a business standpoint, right? And that's the role of the product owner. He's going to prioritize and tell you, okay, if we have all those features to develop, right? Those are translated into all those user stories, and you need to start working on those set of user story first, and then you need to start working on those ones and then finish up with those ones. So it needs to be a prioritization always into the product backlog, which is managed by the product owner, right? I'm going to explain that differently, the whole process. So what happens is the product owner is going to get the requirements set up and written, usually in terms of epics, a story, and he's going to use a software tool. Most of the time is you have many tools out there, Trello, Jira, that most of the companies use today, version 1, etc., etc. And he's going to be writing all those items, user story epics, and put them into what we call a product backlog. He's going to prioritize those, so assign priority to all of them: high, very high, medium, low, or numbers like maybe 1 to 10, 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, something like that. And he's going to add them to the product backlog. Okay, that's the process. And then if you do have the sprint planning meeting, we're going to talk about that also in a few minutes. That's when we decide which one or which ones the dev team is going to be working on during the sprint, and every single sprint as we're going forward. Okay, and every Scrum team needs to have one product owner. But like I said, you can have a product owner that is also part of the development team. Okay, make sense? That's for the product owner. Questions? All right. So the responsibilities of the product owner, as I said before, were to define the features according to the business vision, interact with the stakeholders and the customers to understand what they really need, build, how to fulfill their needs, prioritize those features according to the return on investment. So which ones of the features are going to have the most value? Which ones are lowest priorities that are really nice to have, right? And then they're going to create all the requirements, manage the product backlogs, meaning all the time whenever we're pulling product backlog items from the product backlog, it needs to be reprioritized. Anytime we have more information, it's constantly changing. So you might have a requirement in the epic or user story that's high priority in this sprint, and then by the time you complete the sprint, that story in the product backlog is changing from a high priority to a low priority, depending on what the market became, what the technology became, etc., for any or many reasons. Okay, and then is also responsible for picking a release date. So when do we want to have those product increment delivered into production for the actual customers or end users to use? Okay, and he gives feedbacks about what was built during the sprint review, because he has demos from the dev team showing them what they accomplished, how it works, and then they can say, yes, I mean, that's exactly what I expected, it's good. Or they can say, no, you actually didn't develop this the way it was intended to, you need to change this and all that. And you can adapt and put those stories that were not developed correctly as per the product owner or customer expectation, put it back in the product backlog item, and then do it on the next sprint or improve it in the next sprint. Okay, so that's where we do have the acceptation or the rejection of the results. That can happen. Okay, so and then you have your second and most important Scrum team role in your case is the Scrum Master. And I was telling you before that he's accountable for removing the impediments. He needs to make sure that the development team is operating at all time to the highest possible level of efficiency, right? So you want to make sure that they're focusing on the job, focus. That's actually one of the Scrum values. They need to make sure that they perform at the highest level possible, that nobody's distracting them. So the Scrum Master is what we refer to as a servant leader. He's not a team leader, because like I said, there's no leader, there's no manager in the Scrum framework. Okay, there's no my boss said this, my boss, I need to report to my boss. There's none of that. The Scrum environment empowers the Scrum team to do their work and deliver the highest possible quality of the product increment. Okay, so the Scrum Master is a servant leader. That means that he's there to encourage the team. He's there to solve issues that, or help solve issues that the development team is facing, and that is hindering them from completing a product increment. He needs to actually to shield all this development team members to distraction. Okay, because in some environments, people who I've seen that before, and people starting with the Scrum methodology, actually they tend to mix the SDLC, waterfall SDLC with Scrum, where the managers, like the department managers or the marketing managers, are trying to be present into the Scrum team and trying to dictate the direction on what needs to be built, when all that information should be coming from the product owner, right? And that's not a viable environment to have the Scrum framework implemented in, right? So that's the role of the Scrum Master. If there's anybody trying to distract the dev team from achieving their work, then the Scrum Master needs to deal with that. If there's any blockage, maybe the specific Scrum team is trying to do some integration testing or end-to-end testing with another Scrum team in a Scrum environment or scalable Scrum environment, then the Scrum Master needs to be present to coordinate the dependencies and facilitate the discussions with the other Scrum teams, because that happens a lot in the big companies. Okay, so the Scrum Master is not a team leader. Again, it's not a team leader. He's a servant leader, and he acts as a buffer between the team and any distracting influences. The Scrum Master is coaching the team and ensures that the process is used as intended. So I said that before. One of the main attributions of a Scrum Master is also to coach, because remember, Scrum is a methodology, and as a methodology, it needs to be learned, right? And everything that you're doing in Scrum, you need to make sure that your team is understanding why and how we're doing it to get the most out of the methodology. So that's why the Scrum Master needs to be coaching a lot as well. Okay, so the Scrum Master enforces the rules, the Scrum rules, and he protects, or she protects, the team and keep them focused on the tasks at hand. Okay, that's the role of a Scrum Master. So if you're getting into that job tomorrow, know that those are your main attributions. You need to be rehearsing that and making sure that you understand that right, and that you're present for your Scrum team. Okay, questions? All right, and I just mentioned everything before, so I'm not going to read this. I'm going to read this thing fast. So the core responsibilities of a Scrum Master: protects the values and the principles of Scrum, removes the impediment, keeps the team fully functional and productive, ensures that, oh, that's one thing I forgot, that all the ceremonies, again, notice that I didn't say events, all the ceremonies are kept within the time box they're supposed to be in, right? And I'm going to talk about that down when we're going to go through the events, the ceremony parts. So every time you're having a daily stand-up, for example, it needs to be on the 15 minutes, and you need to keep that, because the Scrum framework is scheduling, or is suggesting to have meetings only in a certain way, and make sure that those meetings are useful, and we're not spending time on meetings on things that we shouldn't be talking about. So that's why, for example, on the daily stand-up is maximum 15 minutes. It needs to stay on the 15 minutes. And that's one of the reasons why the Scrum Master needs to be present to make sure that it happens. The Scrum Master doesn't have to be in the daily stand-up. We're going to see it. But when they're there, when they're not there, they need to make sure it happens, and that is kept on the 15 minutes, for example. And the other ceremonies like the sprint review, the retrospectives, the sprint planning as well need to be kept under the time frame that they are scheduled for. Okay. And then he or she facilitates and enables cooperation, shields the team from dark forces. Dark forces are any external stakeholder who is distracting the development team. Okay. And like I said before, the Scrum Master is not a team manager or a team leader. That's why he or she does not allocate any tasks. He or she does not allocate any tasks. Okay. All right. So now let's talk about the.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead. I think we're going to end with that for today.
If you can go back to slides, if you can go to slides back. One more. Yeah, this one. So basically, no. Yeah, this one is perfect. Thank you. So you said that the Scrum Master coaches the team and ensures the process is used as intended. Right. So who defines the process, being that the Scrum Master does not allocate tasks or in any way? So who defines the process, and who makes sure it's what's the evaluation process to make sure that it is respected?
That's a great question. The process. What is the process, first of all? What process are we talking about?
The one that is underlined, bold and underlined.
No, I'm saying what is behind that word process. Okay, I'm just going to answer.
That's the question. Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, the process is actually all the principles, the rules, the time frame allocated to the all the events and stuff. So you do agree on those things because that's part of the Scrum process. We're talking about the Scrum process, and the Scrum Master knows all those processes, needs to make sure that they are respected. To have the team working in a productive and efficient environment. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Okay.
All right, so we're gonna stop here for tonight. I'm gonna talk to you tomorrow unless there's another question, or if
yes,
there is.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I asked one yesterday about what are the requirements for each of the certifications.
Hold that for tomorrow. I'm going to answer that tomorrow, Jan. Okay?
Yeah.
I'm going to come back on that. All right. On that note, thanks everyone for joining tonight. I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Is it possible to have those PowerPoints?
We have a video at the end of the this session. I'm going to have to put all those videos and share it, put them together and convert them and share them. Okay?
Stefan, your number doesn't work, the number on the flyer, because I was trying to call you on